So my name's Jeff Schoenau. I'm a professor of soil fertility in the Department of Soil Science at the University of Saskatchewan, and I'm also the Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture Chair in Soil Nutrient Management. Well, in terms of looking at response of pulse crops to starter nutrient, work that had been done in the past mainly emphasized responses to Seedrow placed monoammonium phosphate, 1152.0. And so we were interested in potential responses from starter fertilizer blends and products that contained a little bit more nitrogen relative to phosphorus and also sulfur. So that led to a MSc research project conducted by Harshini Dona, who was the graduate student who worked under my supervision, along with Dr. Tom King, who helped out in the research project that was conducted in controlled environment conditions, largely at the University of Saskatchewan College of Agriculture Phytotron facilities, and we also did a small field experiment as well. We did the research work that we did was largely conducted in controlled environment facilities at the University of Saskatchewan College of Agriculture Phytotron, and we also did a small field experiment as well. We worked with 6 annual legume crops that was lentil, pea, chickpea, faba bean, soybean, dry bean, and black bean. And what we worked with as far as fertilizers was we worked with different blends of nitrogen and phosphorus and sulfur fertilizers blended together, and also some combination products as well that had all of those nutrients contained together in one fertilizer granule or prill. Yeah, so what we found at first was that in terms of tolerance to the Seedrow placed fertilizers, and we looked at this in terms of different rates of nitrogen added as the different blends and products, and we found that as a whole, lentil, pea, and chickpea were the most sensitive to the Seedrow placed fertilizers when expressed as nitrogen, and when expressed as rate of added nitrogen, and in particular, rates of added nitrogen of 10 kilograms of nitrogen or less would be rates that we didn't see injury from, depending on the fertilizer product or the crop. But those were the most sensitive, 10 kilograms of N per hectare in the seed row or less, depending on the fertilizer product or the crop. The soybean and the black bean were more responsive to the added starter fertilizer nutrients, and they were slightly more tolerant, generally tolerating between 10 to 20 kilograms of N per hectare of our different fertilizer products and combinations, depending on which specific product we were looking at. But they were more responsive because soybean, it takes a little bit of time for that nodule to form and get fixing nitrogen. So we expected to see and did see a little bit more response to starter N of the soybean compared to the other pulse crops. And in the black bean, there really isn't any suitable commercial inoculant available. So without the rhizobium, we also saw more response of that black bean to the fertilizer nitrogen compared to what we saw in the other pulse crops. And again, for the soybean and the black bean, seemed that depending on the product, between 10 to 20 kilograms of N per hectare was about the max. Faba bean was a crop that actually tended to be the most tolerant to the Seedrow placed fertilizer, but it also didn't respond very much either. And I think that attests to the fact that the crop Faba bean is a pretty good scavenger of nutrients from the soil, and also a good nitrogen fixer as well. Out in the field, we looked at response of soybean and lentil to a combination blend of 50% urea, 50% monoammonium phosphate in a field study 1 year at a site in south central Saskatchewan that was deficient in nitrogen and phosphorus, and to a certain extent sulfur as well. And there we found that in the case of the soybean, 10 kilograms of N per hectare as that 50-50 blend of urea and monoammonium phosphate, so a 28-26-0 blend, gave us a little bit higher yield compared to our unfertilized control. Beyond that, there was no yield benefit from higher rates. And in fact, we looked at the nitrogen fixation in the soybean, and we found that that as we increased rates above 10 up to 30, at 30 kilograms of N per hectare, our nitrogen fixation was significantly reduced at that rate. And when it came to the lentil, really we saw no response in yield or any of the no response in yield to the addition of any of the rates of the added nitrogen phosphorus fertilizer blend. It was pretty much a flat line across the board from 0 to the different rates that were added. But again, we did see once we got above 10 kilograms of N per hectare for both the soybean and for the lentil, we did see some reductions in emergence out there in the field. And so again, helping to support that we do need to pay very much attention to not trying to push too much fertilizer in the seed row with the pulse crops, particularly sensitive crops like lentil and pea. And I think I would say in general, I think it would be prudent to put that fertilizer, if you are going to put that fertilizer on, put it in a band separate from the seed for those higher rates. In general, in terms of responses of the pulse crop, we did another trial with soybean with a paired row configuration, and we saw, as other studies have shown, generally a pretty flat response to added fertilizer nitrogen of that crop. And I guess when it comes to those pulse crops, we always need to recognize that if the nitrogen is not available in the soil, provided you've got good inoculation and good nitrogen fixation capabilities, it will compensate and it will fix nitrogen when the nitrogen's not there in the soil or added as fertilizer. And when you add that fertilizer nitrogen, you don't get much response because the plant just uses the nitrogen in the soil. It doesn't fix as much. We did see one response one year where it was very, very dry. We had a seed applied inoculant only to the soybean, and we got very poor nodulation, and we did see a little bit of response to the added nitrogen fertilizer. Well, I think probably the takeaway is we do need to be cognizant of that injury potential when we put fertilizer in the seed row. It does differ depending on the pulse crop, and as we increase the proportion of nitrogen in there relative to phosphorus, for example, by having urea in a blend, it does increase that injury potential. And again, paying attention to those maximum safe rates that are available in the provincial guidelines, the Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture, I think is important to avoid injury. Higher rates, get it out of that seed row and get it in a separate band.